Welcome to this solo episode of Dialogues with Creators. By solo, I mean basically I'm going to monologue, so you know what's going to happen. This is the third of such this year already in 2026, but along with this, I'll be interviewing at least 5 people, hopefully more, and going on the road to the Association of Writers and Writers program in Baltimore in the 1st of March. So, in this program today, I'm going to talk about my Writers Hall of Fame and the honorable mentions. Who are the people that I consider the greatest writers of at least the last 200 years and the ones that are my go to and my inspiration? Hold on. Okay. I listen to a podcast every week called The Habit. I really recommend this podcast and its organization. The Habit is hosted by Jonathan Rogers, who also runs what is called the Rabbit Room, which is a workshop, organization, network, community of writers, more of the literary genre, but not entirely. As far as they're concerned, songwriters, poets, novelists, filmmakers, and nonfiction writers all fit in the group. And there is a Christian bent to it, but it is not of a particular denomination. It's very ecumenical in that regard. And I would love to attend one of its workshops or retreats. They're a little pricey, and they're all in Nashville, but I would love to go there. And he has some fascinating guests. So I recommend you, if you want to have a good, well thought out podcast about writers, especially writers that tend to be in the Southeast, but not all of them. Many of them are British. I would recommend The Habit by Jonathan Rogers. Every fall they have something called Hutchmoot, and they have a version of it called Housemoot, where you can meet people in your house, in your home, and play the videos of the speakers. And then in Nashville they have an event where the speakers are live, of course. Rogers is a Flannery O'Connor scholar. He has a doctorate in literature, and that was his specialty. And I'll be honest, I'm one of those people who can't quite get why everybody keeps telling me she is the end-all and be-all of writers and Christian writers. But I understand why she's brilliant. She's just not my first cup of tea, so I'm not really going to talk about her today. And that's not a diss on her. I've been to her birthplace in Savannah. You know, she's very interesting, but she's just not my cup of tea. That said, okay, now if you're still listening to me, I would love to be on his podcast. At the end of his interviews, he always asks the same question. I think it's a really good question. Who are the writers, or who is the writer that makes you want to write? And I have thought about that question a whole lot because I would really like to be on a show. But, and I've gone around and around about that, and I've thought, well, if I had to just pick one, I know who I'd pick, but it really wouldn't represent everything I would want to say. And I will talk about that here. The question is an excellent one, but when I come across a really good writer, I don't get inspired. I tend to despair of being able to write anything of value. I read somebody who's really good, and I basically say, why are you doing this, Barbara? Why are you writing? I had that experience in the last 6 months twice. One was reading In the Time of Butterflies by Julia Alvarez, which is a book about the Mirabal sisters who were killed by Trujillo in the Dominican Republic during the time he was a dictator. Horrible, horrible person. Beautiful story. It's a little fictionalized of their actual account and what actually happened to them, but it's based on the facts. The other one that really blew me away was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I had tried to read her 20, 30 years ago and didn't quite get into it, but this one blew me away. And very raw, very brutal, but also very beautiful. I'll never write like that. So give it up, Barbara. That's how I feel. But I do keep writing because I am inspired by people who went before, writers who have gone before us. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about who those are. Almost all of them are dead. I'm going to start by talking about my top 7, then a lot of honorable mentions. Everyone has to be a writer who published more than one book. So I might be leaving some out who, to my knowledge, did not publish more than one book. So hang on. In the Hall of Fame 7, I start with Jane Austen. I know that is not original or a surprise. You know, I'm a woman of a certain age. Of course she's going to pick Jane Austen. But let's be real. Here is a woman born well over 200 years ago. Excuse me. Maybe 240, who published 6 novels in her lifetime, left other manuscripts that have been dealt with and published in part, or someone's added to them. But she died at about the age of 40, very young, had most of her letters, or some of them, burned by her family. We don't know how many, because they didn't want the world to read them. Now, why was that the case? Well, one biographer I read said that she was very sharp-tongued and wrote witty things, let's just put it that way, and they didn't want to be embarrassed. She's also a person who made very little money in her time, especially considering how much money they've made off of her books since then. And there are still books being written about her and movies being made from her works. As far as I'm concerned, she transformed the novel. Novels existed since Quixote, and they were very popular at her time and in the 1700s. But she transformed it. And I think she transformed what it meant to be a female writer. Even though her characters live all in this confined world of English gentry life, dependent on inheritances and women dependent on finding husbands, but her characters are still iconic. And really, what is better than Lizzie Bennet telling off Lady de Bourgh? Oh, I love that scene. Or telling off Darcy the first time he proposes. He deserves it. All of them are great, of course, but my favorite is Persuasion, because it's not about a 20-year-old, young 20-year-old husband hunting woman who has to find a way to be taken care of. But it's about an older woman, she's 27, 28, who thinks she threw away her chance for love and a husband and family. And yet she keeps her integrity. And if you're not familiar with Persuasion, you need to read it or watch the Amanda Root version, because it's very sweet. It's more about people in the military. It's more about more middle class people. It's just very different than the world of, say, Emma or Pride and Prejudice. If you can read all of her novels, you will expand your reading, your intellect, your patience, your experience, and your appreciation of humanity. So she's got to be number one. What can I say? Number two will probably not be a surprise, is someone who took up the pen to transform the novel even more not long after her death, and that is Charles Dickens. He may have fallen out of favor among literary critics, but that is only because the literati today want every page to scream sex and violence and transgressiveness. The word I use for Dickens, and it's not a profound word, but it's rich. All those characters, all of them so closely drawn, all that plot. I have heard it called a web, where if you touch one part of it, everything else moves. Dickens is great because he shows at least a love for humanity despite its frailties. Whether he happened to love people or not, I don't know. And I'm pretty sure there was a scandal about another woman in his life. But in his books, which is all we have to go on, he shows love for people, and so many of them. I can't help but think of Pip in Great Expectations and Magwitch coming back, and the people in that orbit. So sweet. And Little Dorrit, and how faithful she is despite her father's issues. Another writer of his time who would be in his category is George Eliot. But I'm going to be really honest, her style is somewhat harder to engage with than Dickens. He wrote for people, and people loved it. And he liked the money and being a lecturer. Even today, the real money is still in personal appearances. So you've got Austen and Dickens, both from the early 1800s. Dickens lived throughout more of the Victorian period. The third and fourth, I'm going to get away from England, are the two Russians. And I know there's more than two Russian writers, but in my Hall of Fame, it's going to be Leo Tolstoy and Fyodor Dostoevsky. Yes, their books are dense, and no, I haven't read all of War and Peace. I have read Anna. Oh, Anna Karenina, several times. And the brothers Karamazov and Crime and Punishment more than twice each. They all need to be read every 5 years because every 5 years the reader is a different person. And this gets into the subject of what is reading. Does a book read you? What does it mean to read a book? I think any good book has to be read the first time just to know what's going on, to decipher the characters and the plot, and then you have to read it again. And I'll give you an example. I'm going to be talking to a professor about The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. And first time I read it, I was not too into it. I had to read it again for the podcast, and I loved it. I saw much more in it the second time because I had time to understand it. I knew what was going to happen, and I could enjoy it as literature. Plus, Russian literature is so emotional compared to, say, what I've just been mentioning in Austen. She can be a little bit, reserved, of course, but the Russian literature is so emotional, especially the brothers Karamazov. You feel the pain and suffering, as if no one is allowed to be lighthearted and happy there. Yet the pain gives them clarity in something else. The human condition, a spirit maybe. And you can't be neutral about these folks. In Anna Karenina, Vronsky is such a pig. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov is tormented. In the Brothers Karamazov, I want the atheist brother Ivan to come to God and feel love the way Alexei does. And I'm okay with the father being killed. He's such a jerk. And of course, as far as philosophy is concerned, those novels cannot be beat for presenting us with the major questions of the human condition. So that brings me to the fifth, and it's time for an American. I choose Marilynne Robinson, whom you may not know. She wrote the Gilead books, of which there are 4, and one other, Housekeeping, and she's written many philosophical works and books of essays. And while she's not as accessible or well known, she has been very often rewarded for her books, and she's taught writing at the Iowa Creative Writing School program. I like her writing and her because she is not afraid to be true to her faith and is not interested in being trendy or vile or postmodern. Her works are truly American, specifically Midwestern, in the best way. They're very place-centered. They're about people in somewhat confined lives. And I think the best novels are about people in confined lives who take their humanity, their faith, their situation seriously. Her books are literary and they're not fast reads. I would recommend starting with Gilead, but read some background on it beforehand. It is a series of novels about 2 ministers from different denominations in a town, Ames, Iowa, and their lives, how they intertwine. One has 8 children, one of whom is a prodigal, a pretty bad prodigal, and the other is a man who has a child very late in life. And they're just very deep and sensitive books. I think I'm going to switch my original plan and put Toni Morrison in the Hall of Fame, simply because she achieved something in her prose, a certain transcendence that I admire. It is very raw, though. Whereas Jane Austen and George Eliot and even Marilynne Robinson seems tame, there is nothing tame in Morrison. I felt so cold and alone and abused because her characters are. I entered into their existence. In fact, I felt cold when I read The Bluest Eye the whole time. Just cold, like my hands were needing a good fire. So that brings me now to number 6, and number 7, I mean. Toni Morrison was number 6. And I need to go with Charlotte Bronte and Jane Eyre. I love that book. I love Jane, who stands up to the man she loves and would not take his betrayal lightly. Because what Rochester does is unforgivable, and she does not forgive him until he understands what he's done and he suffers. She stands up to St. John, and she stands up to the Lowood School, and she stands up to her vicious aunt. But really, it's only because I love the book so much that I put her here. She should have written more, and she probably did, and I'm kind of going against my first rule. But the fact that she wrote it all, considering the circumstances of her life and the shortness of it, is a miracle. And of course, if you know anything about her family, they all died young from nasty water that they were drinking that flowed through a cemetery. Ugh. And they all died young, except the father. He seemed to not be bothered by it, but all the kids did, and including her brother. So those are my Hall of Fame. And I know that a lot of people would have other choices, and be happy I at least put 2 who were not writing in English. So let's move on to honorable mentions, of which there are many. And I have to start with C.S. Lewis. He should probably be in the Hall of Fame, right? Well, I'm just going to be honest. He is great. His writing blows me away, but I just get so tired of St. Clive's and how he is quoted by evangelicals as if every word he said was literally holy writ. Now, that was true confessions, and that's probably offensive to somebody, but not everything the man said and did was straight from, you know, Mount Sinai. But you aren't well read if you don't know him, and his writing is entertaining, enduring, and beautiful, even if I think sometimes his reasoning is worth questioning. I think personally his fiction might be better than a lot of his essay type books. And we can't mention C.S. Lewis without mentioning George MacDonald, who might be outdated today, but did inspire him, and he wrote some lovely fairy tales. I personally consider Tolkien, who probably should be in my Hall of Fame, as a more enduring writer. So if you need to, go ahead and make him the 8th one in the Hall of Fame, because he had such an immense literary vision and fulfilled it over those years. Now I'm going to go with another English person, and with a little bit of reservation, simply because this is my go-to person to read if I just don't want to read anything else, and that's Agatha Christie, of course. She has her faults as a writer. I will be the first to admit that. But seriously, who else has done what she has? So many books, and so popular, and so copied, and so many movies, etc., still today. However, Agatha Christie is all plot and maybe all setting, but her characters are usually very thin, stock. It's the same people in many cases. Now, some of them are different, and it depends on who you read. Like, I like the Tommy and Tuppence one. They're not that typical stereotype that she uses. But it seems like so many of her books are about rich, useless British people who are simply waiting around for someone else to die to get their money. It's like, go get a job. Stop being a leech on your aunt you're just waiting for her to die and leave you money. What is wrong with you people? And so, well, not all of her characters are like that. So many of them are that it just makes you wonder why she didn't try to write something else. And she did. She did have a series of more literary fiction books as well, which I have not read. All that said, her books are a lot of fun. But so I only keep her there because she's somebody I go to for light reading, and sometimes she's very, she surprises you with her descriptions and such. I do have to say, though, that she lacks empathy. She lacks human empathy. Now, I'm not a person who thinks empathy is the end-all and be-all, but she does, her characters lack empathy, and they're just, I don't like that someone dies, several people die. Usually they're people you don't like. The mystery gets solved, and it's like everything goes back to normal. I don't like cozies in that respect. P.D. James, I think, is a better detective writer and more human, and writes real people. She's harder to read for that reason. She's deeper, more complex, more layered, if you will. But her death toll is high. I like the character of Dalgleish a lot. And recently I read somebody who said that The Children of Men was a horrible book, and they're simply wrong. It's a brilliant book. The movie is not exactly like the book, but it's very interesting in its basic thesis of what would happen if babies stopped being born, what would happen 20 years later. And, that's an interesting science fiction kind of an idea. Another writer I like is Susan Howich, who you probably don't know. Yes, I do prefer British writers, sorry, but she's not that well known. She writes about Church of England clergymen in modern times in London. And along that line, she's sort of in the heritage, The Inheritance of Anthony Trollope, a Victorian writer who had some wonderful books. And in some ways, his books are as good as Dickens, but I think they sometimes lack Dickens' love or apparent love for humanity. Some of his his human empathy, if I use that word again. Trollope got into trouble because he admitted that he wrote for money, and that made people mad. I'm like, what do you think he wrote for? I mean, writing is too hard to just do it for your health. No, I'm being silly, but yeah, he did write for money, and he made a lot of money. But that made people mad when he admitted it. I don't know why anybody that must have been then. Nobody would think anything of Stephen King saying that now, or J.K. Rowling. They get mad at her for something else. Another British writer who I would say deserves honorable mention is George Orwell, and he's we just know him as 1984 and the Animal Farm. I say the book about the pigs, the communist pigs, but he wrote a lot of things. He was a journalist. He wrote about the English language. He wrote about politics. He was not. He was a socialist, but he hated totalitarianism and communism. If I have to put an American in here, let's go with Mark Twain, Samuel Langhorne Clemens. I think he messed around with writing sometimes and wasn't serious, but he did write two of the most American books ever about two young boys who embodied the American spirit and the frontier. And you aren't well read if you don't know those books. I would put Harper Lee on here, but she really only wrote one book. I do not count the one they tricked her into publishing about 10 years ago. That was a travesty of the way they treated her, and the book was weird. I knew of people who were sad that they had named their child Atticus after Atticus in To Kill a Mockingbird, because the Atticus in Go Set a Watchman was so racist. And that was supposedly her original draft of the book. I think they took advantage of her and to make money, and so somebody made some money off of that, but it was not right. And finally, I'm going to go to the classics, Homer, Virgil, and Dante, because I have to, and it's good for you. Okay. Seriously, Homer and Virgil and Dante are the foundation of the kinds of things we read today. And, you know, they just, today would not exist without them. Yes, I know they wrote in poetry. They did not write in prose. They were not novelists, but they wrote long, epic, narrative pieces. And they had a lasting impression on everyone after them. Now, these are the ones I mentioned here, but that's not to say I haven't enjoyed books by other people. I would recommend Joan Didion's Year of Magical Thinking. It's haunting. She's an excellent writer, and she really explores grief from a very human. There's nothing spiritual in her book about grief when her husband dies and then her daughter is so sick. But you get so much vulnerability in the book, and you'll never forget some of the scenes. And my favorite one is where she realized she hadn't cleaned out her husband's clothes 6 months after his death because she kept expecting him to come back, and that'll really get you. That was the Year of Magical Thinking, that he would come back. I read one Ursula Le Guin and liked it. There is a lot of good science fiction out there. I'm a fan. It's interesting. Some people say that science fiction is short story form. It's not really meant for novels. I'm not sure. I think Dune was brilliant. I only read the first one, didn't read the others, but it was amazing. So, and there are lots of other good science fiction novels, so I'm not sure that that's true, but science fiction did start as short stories in pulp magazines of all things. I'm supposed to like Wendell Berry. Everybody tells me that I'm supposed to like him. I find him a bit of a slog to read. It may be that I think his agricultural idyllic worldview just isn't realistic. It's also because I'm not from Kentucky. I find that Kentuckians really like him. He protests against nuclear power. I don't know how we're going to get out of this energy mess, especially with the AI plants, without nuclear power, which is another reason to hate AI. And he thinks nuclear power is evil. Okay. Right now, I'm reading a lot of books I could recommend, and two I've already mentioned. Julia Alvarez, In the Time of the Butterflies, and The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. Now, warning, the Oscar Wilde book is dirty, and so I don't recommend it to just anyone, but it is beautifully written, brilliantly written in its structure and its combination of genres and history. Going back to English books, one of my favorites, I'm not sure why, but is Howard's End by E.M. Forster. Just love that book. Read it many times. And Beauty by Zadie Smith is taken from it, plot lines. The Japanese novel The Memory Police is very interesting. As I said, Dune blew me away. Sherlock Holmes stories are fun to read, but I find Sherlock Holmes incredibly annoying. But the voice of the narrator is very interesting, and the plots are clever. Serena by Ron Rash was astounding book, but the movie was a disappointment. I'm also reading right now The Once and Future King by T.H. White, because I felt like I had zero knowledge. I had more than I thought of the King Arthur legend, of which so much fantasy literature is based. I do not read much fantasy unless it comes highly regarded. I'm thinking about reading The Lord of the Rings again because it's so priceless. It's so enduring. But let me just say, there is plenty to read. I hope you got a sense of some good books to try out. I tried not to mention the standards I was supposed to. My reading advice is to read eclectically, not the same kind of thing. That will only help you, that is, reading the same kind of thing all the time. That will only help you if you want to write that genre so you can avoid the pitfalls of writing that someone else did. You know, it would be bad to think you're going to write a great novel and then read another one and find it was already been written a long time ago. But while you read, don't let someone else's story keep you from living your own. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll continue and go back and listen to some of my really great episodes and some of the people I have talked to. Some of them are local to North Georgia. Some of them live in other parts of the country. And I'm hoping to have some really great guests this season. This is the 8th season of this podcast. I've done it since spring of 22. How long will I keep doing it? I don't know. We'll see. Bye-bye.